There have been many games that have fallen from popularity over the many years of YouTube, from Slender the 8 Pages to SCP-087-B, all the way to Sonic.exe and Granny. These games still seem to get covered more so than the one I remember the most, and that would also be the first horror game I ever saw on YouTube, which I will get to the title later. The first horror game that I remember liking follows a massive movement that was a major part of early indie horror games, which is that of the RPG Maker horror game. RPG Maker used to be the premier game developer engine back in the early days of the internet, creating many gems that people have played to death. From Yume Nikki to Off, many horror games have used this engine to great effect, because with the way RPG Maker is set up, it allows just about anyone to create a game, as the game engine gives us so many tools to make your first game without much programming knowledge needed to make your first game. So it allowed anyone to make their own video game ideas, allowing the games of the early 2010s to all be made in that engine, allowing them to share their own horrific stories that they wouldn't have been able to show with other game engines, because other game engines required a lot more knowledge of coding than RPG Maker required. And games like Yume Nikki, which I covered last week, used this engine to its fullest degree, with Yume Nikki being one of my absolute favorite horror games of all time. But we are not talking about that game, because even though this game was bigger than Yume Nikki was ever, at this point in time, Yume Nikki is even more popular than this one. And Yume Nikki has seemingly overshadowed this game over time, because this game seems to have been completely forgotten about by the internet. And it's getting harder and harder to find someone who's actually heard of this game, as it seems to just be a relic of early YouTube that many people don't remember, because it wasn't really that special compared to many of the other games at the time. But it was also the first game to introduce me to the horror genre on YouTube, and that would of course be Ao Oni. But before going any further, most of the people watching are not subscribed, so if you see this video and you like it, make sure to like and subscribe if you like the video. And if you watch the video all the way through, make sure to leave a comment down below. I make sure to try and respond to every comment in some sort of way if I think I can add something. Now let's get on with the actual video. Ao Oni is a Japanese horror video game from 2008, created by a single developer, no props, and follows 4 teenagers whose names I'll probably butcher, but let's try anyways. Hiroshi, Mika, Takuro, and Takeshi as they explore an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of their town. And while exploring the mansion, they run into a purple monster, which is the namesake for the game, the Ao Oni, which starts picking off the teenagers one by one as they explore the mansion. And the game follows Hiroshi as he tries to escape the mansion by himself while solving puzzles and running away from the monsters that all seem to be some form of the Ao Oni. But things start to get way more complicated, as when the friends seem to start getting killed one by one, they all start to come back as their own versions of the Ao Oni. And because of that, while you only start with having to deal with one, by the end of the game you're dealing with 4 separate versions of the Ao Oni that are all following and trying to kill you. But while the game was originally released in 2008, the game wouldn't fully become what we know it as today until 2011, when version 6.23 was released. And that is when playthroughs of the game started to come out, and when the surge of popularity really started to grow. One of the first things that can be noticed is just how quickly this game became popular in the US, as many YouTubers began to cover it, especially after PewDiePie covered it. And after PewDiePie came Some Ordinary Gamers, Corey X Kenshin, and finally Markiplier, which caused many people to want to check the game out, as it seemed to just be everywhere at the time. You just couldn't escape it. But then, to the surprise of many people, just as quickly as it blew up, it died as the hype around the game seemed to rapidly disappear. After 2014, what was originally never-ending coverage of the game completely disappeared in under a minute. And unlike the majority of other games that die that quickly, this wasn't due to a lack of new content. There was new stuff coming out, including a sequel to the game. Hell, a film was even made based upon it. So what caused it to die so quickly from being so popular? But first, let's look at what made it so popular in the first place. First off, the simplicity of the game. The art style and gameplay is quite easy for most people to pick up and play, as it's just a simple exploration game with puzzles, not too crazy. This is not some sort of revolutionary crazy game, it's just a simple free-to-play horror game that seems to just be there to play for a couple hours and that was it. This game was not blowing anyone out of the water, it was just a simple fun little game that was there to scare you for a small amount of time. It was also free, so a parry barrier didn't keep people from trying the games themselves after seeing it in a playthrough, so it followed games like Slender the 8 Pages, where being completely free mostly caused it to get much more popular than it could have gotten if it costed money. And then there is the monster. While it's not exactly frightening, it can be quite threatening, and if the few scares that are in the game are really good at catching you completely off guard while playing it. The game is scripted quite well, as many of the scares that are scripted are really well placed and put in a way that it will catch you off guard while playing. It's not just like a ooh spooky jump scare, there's like actually well scripted scares in this game. The most famous being the floorboard jump scare, where the Ao Oni shoots his head through the floorboard, catching whoever's playing the game completely off guard on their first playthrough with absolutely no warning. And the game is really good at putting the fear of the unknown in you, as with the random chances the Oni could appear with any of the rooms. While you'll find most of the scares in the game are scripted, there is always a random chance that when you go through a room or hallway that the Oni could appear anywhere, making it so that you are on edge the whole time while playing the game, as you don't know where the Oni could come out from. He could just be in any room at any time and catch you off guard when you're least expecting it. And I think that makes up for the lack of scary enemy design, because while the game can startle you, the design of the enemies are almost comical, causing you to almost feel the opposite of fear when you see them. And I think because of the random chance, it makes the horror of the game actually scary, because nowhere in the house is safe, as you can go back to the room and have the Oni just waiting to jump you upon opening it. And there's only really two ways to escape the Oni. It's either by tiring him out while running or by hiding in one of the closet. But however, hiding is not a 100% guarantee of safety, because if it sees you entering the closet, he can open the closet doors and kill you. And as you can see in the cutscenes, such as the one in the jail cell, it's the fact that the Oni can in fact move extremely quickly, but he chooses not to. I think that makes the game a little bit more frightening, because it makes it seem like the Oni could actually kill you rather easily if it wanted to, but it chooses not to, instead toying with you and hoping to catch you off guard when you're least expecting it. And then there's the block Oni, making the difficulty of the game jump up to 11. Unlike the main Oni, this one does not try to move slow. In fact, this one decides to move extremely fast, catching you completely off guard. This is the only one where hiding from the monster is the easiest option, as outrunning it is completely out of the question due to its extreme speed. However, there's one gripe I have with this game that almost ruins it for me, and it's most definitely the puzzles in the game. The puzzles of the game are unnecessarily difficult for absolutely no reason. Puzzles of this game can be absolutely ridiculous, and the only reason I could think of behind the ridiculously difficult puzzles is a way to pad out the runtime, because besides that, the game is fairly straightforward to figure out. But I think having to look for a walkthrough in a goofy free horror game is frankly frustrating, because the game is almost impossible to figure out with the horribly difficult puzzles inside of it. The most difficult being physically impossible unless you know Japanese culture, because that is literally what the puzzle is, and I think that is ridiculous, as it doesn't add difficulty in a fun way, it's just annoying for absolutely no reason. Compared to games like Ib and Yume Nikki, this game seems to be of a lot less quality than all those others, and it is quite surprising as those games are some of the most intriguing horror games made in this engine. However, this is the one that got extremely popular, and when you're playing it, you will just find yourself frustrated and also somewhat bored as the puzzles just completely ruin the experience of the game as you can't figure them out by yourself without a walkthrough. And I think if you can't play the game without a walkthrough, then it's probably not designed well in the first place, which is what caused it to probably die out in the first place. And then there's the sequels to the game that are so completely forgettable that I almost forgot about it in the first place, and the movie isn't much better and deserves its lower view scores as they are both just completely forgettable. So the reason I think it completely died out was just because there was so much more interesting things that came out afterwards, because this game just didn't have much going on with it. Compared to a lot of the other RPG Maker horror games, this game is way less intriguing, and I find it disappointing that games like Yume Nikki and The Witch's House just never got the same level of attention as this one. So while I think there's a lot of things that work well in this game, it just doesn't hold up compared to many others, and the game is just not as scary as people remember it to be and has just aged quite poorly overall. And I think the game failed to live up to the hype and memories I had of it, and that allowed the game to fade away into obscurity and to the point of almost no one remembering it.